Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the God the Artist podcast. I'm your host, Morgan McCarver, and today I will continue with the audiobook of God the Artist. And this is the final chapter in part 2, chapter 12, Glazing and the Grace of God. Romans 9:19-21. Will you say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? 2 Timothy 2:20-21. Now in a great house are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honorable use and some for dishonorable. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, even useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. Esther 4:13-14. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Matthew 6:26-30. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet our heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Proverbs 26:23. Like the glaze covering an earthen vessel are fervent lips with an evil heart. 2 Samuel 17:27-29. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobai the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir the son of Amiel from Lodebar, and Barzillai of Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheeses from the herd, for David and his people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Lamentations 4:2. The precious sons of Zion, worth their weight in fine gold, how they are regarded as earthen pots, the work of a potter's hands. Revelation 2:26-28. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as I myself have received authority from my Father, and will give him the morning star. If you've ever painted anything, then you probably know the final piece won't look exactly like you imagined. When you start with a blank canvas or a white wall, you can feel the potential. As soon as you slap on that first brushstroke of paint, it seems like all of the potential vanishes. You have picked a color, and that shows on the surface. It is no longer white. The work has begun. The intended use for a clay vessel determines its glaze or finish. This is true of our spiritual lives as well. It is a hard lesson to learn at times, but God creates each of us with distinct strengths and weaknesses. This world will tell us we can be anything we want to be if we just work hard enough. But if God has not blessed our path, we won't get very far. Sometimes on stressful days, I question why God gave me the desire for pottery. If I'm really physically at a disadvantage when it comes to pottery, then why am I so drawn to it? God reminds me and you with a question. Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? Romans 9:21. God doesn't make us all rock stars or CEOs of wealthy businesses, A porcelain toilet is not nearly as honorable in my mind as a porcelain figurine, but it is definitely more needed. Paul explains, if anyone cleans himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. 2 Timothy 2:21. We must internally cleanse our thoughts and our hearts and our spirits, so that God the potter can use us for his honorable will. Glaze can be broken down into the basic elements of clay, water, glass, flux, and in some cases, pigment. The clay element in the glaze helps it stick to the bisque piece during the glazing process and prevents the glaze from running off the pot in the firing. The water allows the glaze to be applied by brush or by dipping the piece. The glass seals the piece, making it waterproof and durable, and the flux helps to melt the glass. The pigment allows the glaze to be colored, giving variety to the work. The glaze can be applied by dipping the piece into it, painting the glaze onto the piece, or spraying it onto the piece as well as in a ventilated spray booth. Glaze, before it is fired, is pretty toxic, so safety precautions should always be taken. Before firing, the glaze might not look the color it will turn out when fired. This is the fun part. Red and blue do not always make purple in the glaze world. The chemistries in glazes can react to the heat by making different colors or creating some interesting textures, some desired and some not so much. There's little worse than finishing a great pot only to have it ruined by the glaze. The elements and chemicals in the glazes will turn colors when reacting with each other and with the heat of the kiln. Glaze adds the strength to the piece. It gives a smooth layer of protection against food in daily use. There are different types of firings that allow for different techniques. Oxidation firings allow oxygen to circulate continuously throughout the kiln and react with the glazes. Reduction firings reduce the oxygen in the kiln toward the end of the firing. This reduced atmosphere is created by blocking off the chimney of the kiln with a damper, cutting off the oxygen from a combustible fuel source like wood or gas. Wood ash and soda ash can be added during the firings to create different firing atmospheres as well. Raku and pit firings involve smoke and combustible materials. If you've ever seen horsehair pottery, the lines created are the scorch marks of locks of hair that were laid onto the hot piece taken right out of the kiln. Burnt hair creates black lines. Glazed pieces must be carefully loaded into the kiln because they can stick to each other or the kiln itself permanently during glaze firing. Since glaze is basically liquid glass, it can run and fuse to almost anything. Every base must be wiped free before loading the kiln so the pieces will not stick to the shelves during the firing. Depending on how hot the clay is firing, the glaze must be able to withstand that temperature as well. Whichever glaze is chosen, its firing temperature has to match the firing temperature of the clay. If the firing temperatures do not match, then either the clay or glaze will not be fired to the right temperature. Sometimes this leads to underfiring a glaze, causing a chalky texture to form on the glaze instead of a smooth, glassy one. It could also cause overfiring of the glaze, resulting in glaze bubbling and running all over the kiln shelves and ruining the piece. Sometimes the glaze reaches maturity, but the clay is underfired and porous, or overfired and starts to slump, bloat, or become brittle. Glaze not only strengthens the piece, but it also serves to beautify it. When we think of the beauty of the Bible, one of the women that comes to mind would probably be Esther. The author tells us that she was beautiful. She was taken into King Ahasuerus' harem. Her cousin Mordecai learned that an official in the king's court, Haman, was planning to destroy all of the Jews. Esther rightfully feared death going against Haman, but asked the king for the Jews to be spared. This meant asking the king to go back on his word. It also meant exposing her true identity as a Jew, which she had kept hidden. Last, it meant going to the king even though she wasn't summoned. This alone could have gotten her killed. She voiced all of her concerns to Mordecai through a servant. Mordecai sent this message back to Esther. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:13-14. God allowed Esther's beauty to send her to the trial of her life, but he also made it the reason that she was able to spare the Jews. If she had not been taken by the king in the first place, she would not have had such a close relationship with the king, and therefore would not have been able to save her people. God gave her the position of queen so she could bring salvation to her people. Her husband spared her and chose to listen to her over Haman because of her strength, wit, grace, and dependence on God. Jesus says in Matthew, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" Matthew 6:2-30. The pot does not tell the potter what glaze it wants. That's for the potter to decide. We as Christians must remember that God's will is most important. We might have plans, but God's will is best. I want to remind us that self-image is not as important as what's inside. Similarly to ceramics, the structure and craftsmanship of the pot are more important than its glaze. A beautifully colored pot with a poor foundation will serve no good purpose. This is so important for every child of God to realize, yet one of the hardest lessons to learn. Proverbs tells us a similar lesson. The author writes, "Like the glaze covering an earthen vessel are fervent lips with an evil heart." Proverbs 26:23. The term earthen vessel refers to earthenware clay. This is a lower firing clay that withholds decently to thermal shock. It is common to find earthenware wild clay in most parts of the world, so this clay would most likely be available. Glazed pieces would be more expensive and used for more special occasions. This verse is saying that the piece might look pretty, but it's ordinary on the inside. The fervent lips or good talk might sound pleasing, but if that person has an evil heart and does not mean what she says, then there is nothing remarkable about her in the eyes of God. Earthen vessels are most likely describing daily cookware, water containers, and other utilitarian pots. There are several references to earthen vessels that help us decipher what they culturally represent. They appear in record keeping. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi the son of Nahash from Rabbah the Ammonites, and Mahir the son of Amiel from Lodebar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rojalim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, "The people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness." 2 Samuel 17:27-29. These earthen pots must have been useful in the wilderness because they were mentioned as their own unit. They weren't described as full of a more valuable item, although they probably were used for storage. They might have held water to keep it clean. Those earthen vessels were the essentials, not the prized heirlooms. In Lamentations, we get another reference. The author says, "The precious sons of Zion, worth their weight in fine gold, how they are regarded as earthen pots, the work of a potter's hands." Lamentations 4:2. Once again, the earthen vessels represent the unexciting. The book of Lamentations tells destruction that has befallen Zion. This verse is saying that even sons, those who should culturally be prized in a family because they will inherit and provide for the family's name and legacy, are treated as everyday earthen pots. They are overlooked because of all of the turmoil and hopelessness. In Revelation, we get another reference. Jesus says through John's visions, "The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give the authority over the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as myself have received the authority from my Father." Revelation 2:26-27. Those who have been faithful to Jesus and his commandments will be allowed to have authority. Instead of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of everything being crushed by stone, now Christ's followers will use iron to break apart nations as easily as breaking earthen vessels. I'm sure you've seen one of those orange-red terracotta flower pots that taper and feel rough to the touch. That is a good example of an earthen vessel. In fact, it is made of earthenware clay. It is just an everyday pot, easily overlooked. It would be easy to smash it with an iron rod. If you put some glaze on it, it might be prettier to look at, but it is still the same red-orange clay underneath. God does not compare his children to these pots in this reference. No, we are special to him. We are worth celebrating over when we return to him because he cares for us deeply, his creation. The matching and melding of clay and glaze allow for vitrification. Vitrification occurs when the clay has been fired to the beginning of its melting temperature. All the clay particles will melt and seal together at this stage, making the piece waterproof. If you fire too much hotter than this, your clay will melt. Earthenware clay fires at such a low temperature because the iron in that clay melts at lower temperatures. The iron is what gives the clay the red-orange color. The clay has not been fully fired to its mature temperature until the glaze firing. The bisque firing only begins with what the glaze firing completes. Similar to how Adam only began what Jesus completed. Adam and Eve sinned, but they could not pay the price for their sin. Jesus came down to be the human sacrifice to pay for the sins of humanity. Jesus finished and corrected what Adam and Eve had ruined, a sinless and personal relationship with God. Just like a glazed piece appears more brilliant than a bisque piece, Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension produced brilliant salvation for humanity. But it is not the conclusion. Jesus is coming back for us. Glaze is similar to the Holy Spirit entering into a new Christian's life. We can't help but spread Jesus' love and share our testimony. We look different too. We are smiling, radiant, and glowing. Like the glaze is fused to the pot, Christians are completely sealed by God and covered in the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. Yes, we are still sinful, but Jesus' sacrifice, grace, and forgiveness coat our lives in the eyes of the Lord, allowing us to have personal relationships with him. Just like fired glaze cannot be removed from a pot, nothing can separate us from God's love. This isn't to say we won't face struggles, injury, or illness. God still allows those trials of life. But once we ask Jesus to transform our lives, we will never be alone again. God's grace covers us. Within the variety of glazes, each one holds a different purpose. Just like the glazes, everyone is created for a purpose. Just because someone else has different talents from us, it does not make either of us more important. God has given us all unique skill sets for a specific reason, to fulfill his purpose in our lives. Creativity challenge. Create a self-portrait. What do you see superficially just from looking at the picture? Now cover the picture in affirmations and verses of who God says you are. What has God told you his plan for you? How can that interior reflect on your exterior self? Thanks for listening. Next time we'll start chapter 3. Blessings.